Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. I'm Nick Park, and recently I was in the United States and I was driving through the state of Alabama. And in the United States, particularly in the southern United States, you see a lot of towns and cities named after biblical place names, often ones with great significance. But in Alabama, I saw a sign for Dothan, Alabama, and obviously named after the place Dothan, which is mentioned in the Old Testament. Now, you can still visit Dothan in Israel today. If you go to Dothan, there's a lot of archaeological remains there, dating way back to before the time of Jesus. You are also close in the mountains, very close to Dothan, archaeologists found a bronze bull, which was a part of an Israelite settlement that was worshipping this, that would go back to the times whenever the Israelites were falling into idolatry and worshipping golden calves. So Dothan, yeah, it's in the Bible, and it's mentioned in the Bible twice. Now, the name Dothan means two wells, because there was two prominent wells in Dothan. If you go there today, you can still see the two wells, the ancient wells in Dothan. But the two times that Dothan crops up in the Old Testament are very significant. The first one is in Genesis 37, whenever Joseph went to visit his brothers while they were looking after the sheep, and they were at Dothan, and that was where they then decided to throw him into a pit, and may even have been in one of the wells, we don't know, but they threw him into a pit, and there they were going to kill him or leave him there to be killed, but instead they sold him to Ishmaelite slavers, who ended up taking him down to Egypt, and we all know the story of Joseph and how that all played out. Now, the other time that we find the Dothan mentioned in the Old Testament is in 2 Kings chapter 6, which is where the prophet Elisha, he was surrounded by a Syrian army, because what had happened was Elisha he'd been hearing and from God the plans of the Syrians to attack Israel. And so every time the Syrians attacked Israel, the Israelites were there waiting for them, ready. And the king of Syria was getting dead mad, saying, we've got a spy in the camp. And somebody said, no, it's the prophet Elisha. He hears from God, and God knows what you're saying, even the privacy of your own room. And so the king of Syria sent an army to capture Elisha and surrounded him. And it's a well-known biblical story that they woke up the next morning, Elisha and his servant, and his servant looked out and said, oh master, we're surrounded. What are we going to do? And Elisha said, oh Lord, open the young man's eyes. And when the Lord opened the young man's eyes, there was actually a much larger army surrounding the Syrians, an army of the chariots and the horsemen of Israel. And, God delivered Elisha. Not only that, he blinded the Israelite or the Syrian army, and he was able to lead them blind into Samaria. The king graciously let them go, but it basically taught the Syrian king, don't mess with Israel and don't mess with Elisha. Now, what do those two stories have in common? The two times that Dothan crops up in the Old Testament, Joseph and what happened with his brothers, and then this incident with Elisha. Well, they're both actually saying the same thing, that there are times whenever things happen in our lives and they look really bad. They're not how we would have chosen it. Joseph would not have chosen to have been imprisoned and sold as a slave down into Egypt, but that happened at Dothan. The prophet and his servant would not have chosen to be surrounded by a Syrian army. They would have been things they would have sought to avoid, both Joseph and Elisha and his servant. However, in both instances, God turned it around, because God had a very different plan in what was happening. As far as Joseph was concerned, Joseph later said this to his brothers, you intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. Often we quote that as, slightly misquote that as saying, Satan intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. But the actual quote there is Joseph says to them, you intended this for evil, but God intended it for good. I'm sure the devil did intend it for evil as well. But the other time in 2 Kings, again, it's the same thing. A situation that looks bad, a situation that looks like a real problem that they've landed themselves into. But in God's plan, it's simply an opportunity for God to show his glory. And so I don't know if that's what the people in Alabama had in mind when they first named their settlement there that would become the city, Dothan, but I do know that we need Dothans in our lives. You know, there are times you may face things today and it's not what you would have chosen to happen. And I would encourage you, if that happens, if you find yourself in a tough situation, a painful situation, a sticky situation, to say, God, would you please make this a Dothan in my life? Would you now, even though it looks like it's intended for evil, even though it looks like I'm surrounded, would you turn it around and show, Lord, that you are in control and you're working out your purposes in my life? May God bless you today. Have a great day in Jesus' name, and join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.